Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be bringing you the tutorial for the new Fibi crossbody from Oro Rosa Patterns. This is a really unique crossbody bag. It has magnetic snap closure for the main pocket here, which has a slip pocket inside. It has on the back a large zipper closure pocket, but on the front, in these really unique folds, there are actually 3 more zipper pockets. Those pockets are of varying sizes and can be used for different things, and the way that the construction works for these is really, really unique. So I'm excited to show you how this bag comes together so that you can make your very own Fibi crossbody. So let's get going. For the purposes of this tutorial, I am assuming that you have all of your pattern pieces cut out and marked, and that you have the supplies that are listed in the pattern instructions. First, we need to get all of our prep work done. We need to place our magnetic snaps. So grab your marked pieces, your 2 front top trims and your upper front pocket, as well as your 3 pairs of magnetic snaps and the washers. You'll also need some duct tape to cover up the prongs. Grab a ruler and a pen, and we are going to mark those snap placements. First up, grab your back top trim. That is the piece that has the 1 line and the piece of Decaville heavy on it. And you're going to mark the center. This is the center from either side, not the center of your Decaville. And then you're going to draw a line down over that stabilizer. Now measure 5/8 of an inch down from this marking line that we made in the beginning on that center line that we just made there. Then using your washer, mark your prong placement. And then we're going to place 1 stud in this back top trim piece. The stud piece is the piece that is sticking out. With the slits made, I use my seam ripper. You can pop those prongs through the holes. You don't need to put anything on the back of this to stabilize because there's this piece of Decaville there already. Grab your washer. Bend those prongs out. And then cover those prongs up with a piece of duct tape. Pressing that down really, really well. And then you can set that back top trim piece aside. We're going to mark the center on the front top trim piece also, the same way as we just did on the back trim piece. But this time we're going to continue that center line down onto both pieces of stabilizer. Then again, marking 5/8 of an inch down from this top line. We will mark now the socket side. And that pairs up with the stud side that we just did on this matching piece of Decaville on the back trim. Using my seam ripper, I just cut those little slits very carefully, and then putting my snap in from the front, place the washer on, fold the prongs out, and cover that with a piece of duct tape. So this socket pairs with this stud, and we need to place 2 studs underneath here. This is the front trim piece, and then those are the ones that will fold down for the fold-over part of your finished bag. So working again from the back, we're going to mark the placement for 2 more studs. Grab your ruler, and you're measuring 1/2 inch down from this line here and 3.5 inches up. I'm going to put a mark there, and then the same the other way. We're going 1/2 inch down from this line here and 3.5 inches away from the center. And then those 2 Markings should be 7 inches apart and both 1/2 inch below this line here. Then using our washer to mark our placement again. Seam ripper to make those little cuts. If you are using a material that frays, you will want to put some fray check on your cuts as well. Flip it over. Make sure that you have 2 stud pieces. Washers on. And cover them both with some duct tape. And now we need to do the matching sockets for these 2 stud pieces. And those go on our upper pocket piece. Flip that over, marking the center one last time. And this time we're going 3.5 inches out from the center line, the same as we did for the top piece, but we're going 1.25 inches below that marked line. Making sure again that your marks are based on this line that we drew, not the edge of your stabilizer. And then the same steps again to place these 2 socket sides of the magnetic snap pair. We are going to get our zippers ready. So you have 4 zippers in this pattern, 1 for the back and then 3 for the front pockets. The back zipper is the 10.5 inch zipper, so we're going to set that aside with those 2 tabs for now, and we're going to apply the ends to the 3 front zippers. The shorter of the zippers will be the topmost zipper pocket, and these 2 are for the middle and lower pockets. In order to sew these on to the ends, we need to fold them in half. So we're just going to fold them in half, short sides together, and then we're just going to put a crease in here. We have 6 of these tabs folded in half, but before we put those on, we need to pop our pulls on. Looking at your zipper tape, see which tooth is sticking further out, and on this one, it is the left-hand side. So I'm going to open up my zipper tape about 2 inches, slide my pull on from the left side, grab the right side, tuck it inside that zipper head, then pull the left side down till I can just see those teeth are meeting up, and then push the back of the zipper head until it clicks on. So you can see that that left side tooth is still further out and there's no skipped teeth there. So I know that my pull is on evenly, and I can repeat that for the other 3 zippers. And now we can put on our tabs. These are going to be hidden in the deep recessed pockets at the front of the bag. So when you are putting your pulls on, you may want to use just a more basic pull rather than a fancier pull on those particular pockets. Grab a couple of clips and we're just going to clip that tab on the end there. So these are our 2 11-inch zippers and our 9.5-inch zipper, and we have our 6 folded tab pieces. The raw end is going to line up with the raw end of your zipper tape. You're just going to grab a clip and clip that on. And you're going to repeat that 6 times, 2 on the end of each zipper, with the fold pointing towards the main part of your zipper tape. When you have all of those clipped on, the next thing to do is to sew this edge here, the very end of all of those zippers, at 3/8 of an inch. So we're just sewing along here, 3/8 of an inch, 6 times. I'm going to go and do that on the sewing machine, and then I'll come back over to the table. Now that we have those tabs sewn on, we're going to fold the tab around to enclose the raw end of the zipper. So just folding it right around the end, and then we're going to clip it again, and then we'll take it over to the machine and top stitch. So just taking the folded part of the tab around the raw end and then back to the back side of the zipper, clip that in place, and then we will sew it at 1/8 of an inch to top stitch that tab. And I'll head back over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew along this edge here to top stitch that tab down and sew it down at the back. Those 3 front zippers are ready, so we're going to set those aside, and we're going to put the tabs on the back zipper. Take your 2 vinyl tabs and your 2 lining tabs, and then we are going to sandwich the zipper tape between vinyl and lining, with the vinyl being face down with the zipper teeth and the lining facing the back of the zipper tape. Ensuring that your pull is on. We're now going to sew those tabs on, sewing through all 3 layers at 3/8 of an inch. Now that is sewn on there, we're just going to trim the seam allowance here on just the vinyl layer down to 1/8 of an inch. I like to use duckbill applique scissors to do that, but you can just use regular scissors. Just trimming that off to reduce the bulk there at the end, only through that vinyl layer. And now we will fold the lining out and the top layer out. Finger press that down, and then we are going to top stitch down the edge here at 1/8 of an inch. Now that we have both ends of that back zipper top stitch, we're going to grab our connector pieces. They should have a piece of Decaville light fused in the middle, and I've also drawn a line down the center here. And we are going to be folding the long raw ends into the middle. I like to use a piece of double-sided tape. So we're going to grab that, and we're just going to place it over that line in the middle. If you haven't already drawn that line on, you can draw that in now. Then we're going to remove the backing and just fold the long sides into the middle, folding them around that stabilizer piece there. If you have a seam roller, you can just press those sides there. Get a nice crease. And then once again, I'm going to go over to the machine and top stitch around this connector piece at 1/8 of an inch. We're going to set those top stitched connector tabs aside, and we're going to grab our strap. The first thing we're going to do is draw a line down the center of our strap. The strap is 4 inches wide, so that line is going to be 2 inches from the long end. And just draw that straight down the middle. We're then going to grab our double-sided tape, and we are going to put a line of double-sided tape along the full length of the strap on either side of that line that we just drew. If you are using a stretchier material for your strap, like a stretchier vinyl or a leather, you may want to put a strip of stabilizer just in one small section of the strap so that it doesn't stretch with use. I'm going to put a strip of 3/4 of an inch cross-grain ribbon just down one end, keeping it out of the seam allowance to help stabilize this vinyl. We now need to do the double fold for our strap to enclose these raw ends here. The way that we do that is by folding towards the center line and then the center line again, and then we will fold it in half to enclose the raw edges. I like to start in the middle of my strap. Peel off the double-sided tape on one side, and then starting approximately in the center, I'm going to fold directly across to the line that we drew, but not over the line, just coming up to meet that line, or even slightly short of the line for when we do the second fold. And go from the center out to the edge making sure that I'm folding straight across and that I'm not twisting my strap at all. And press that down onto the double-sided tape. You can press that down a little with your seam roller just to keep that in place while we fold the other side in. Just making sure that it's nice and straight. If you need to, you can pop a few clips on there just to keep it folded over while we continue to work. Flip it around. We're just going to fold this side over about 1/16 of an inch away from the first side, starting in the center again and working our way out with that tiny gap there. It will just help us be able to fold that final fold to enclose that raw seam. And then folding it once again. I like to start in the center each time just to reduce the likelihood of any twists or skewing in my crossbody strap. Grab some clips and we're just clipping the folded edges together, making sure that it is stuck down at that double-sided tape in the middle. And now that we have the raw ends all folded into the center, we are going to go and sew this entire strap. A couple of things to note when you are sewing a vinyl strap. I like to use a walking foot so that I get an even feed of all of the layers as I go through my sewing machine. If you don't have a walking foot, then you're going to want to sew down one entire side and then flip your strap back around and over and then sew the same direction down the second side to reduce your twisting. You will likely need to increase your tension so that you get an even stitch since you're going through so many layers compared to other parts of your sewing. And use a longer stitch length on your top stitching, and also make sure that you have enough thread in your bobbin so that you don't run out in the middle of your project. To get a nice even stitch line, I like to look to see approximately where 1/8 of an inch is lining up with part of my presser foot so that I can get an even line all the way around my strap. And make sure if you're using a walking foot that the end of the strap is not catching on part of that walking foot as you go through. And if you aren't using a walking foot, then right now I would finish my stitches here and then I would come back to this end and sew down here rather than go around like a big rectangle. Now that strap is done, we just tie those threads off and then either trim them or tuck them in and we can start gathering up all of our packs. Before we move on, we're going to get organized into packs. You are going to have pack 1, which is your strap, pack 2 for the lower front pocket, pack 3 is the middle front pocket, pack 4 is the upper front pocket, pack 5 is for the lining of the middle section of the bag, and pack 6 is for the back section of the bag. Grab all of the components of pack 1 and we are now going to build our strap. The first thing that we need to do is slide one end through our slider. Have a look at your strap and observe your stitches and see if they look even on both sides or if there is the side you would prefer to have as the back of your strap. And whichever side you determine to be the back, start with that side up. You're going to grab your slider. Ideally, it would be a chunkier, wider slider than this. This is what I had on hand, so this is what I will be using. You're going to take your slider and you're going to put one end through your slider piece and then back down through the top. Because sometimes these strap ends can be a little bit tricky to put through the hardware. We're going to put the strap end on after we've threaded our strap through that swivel. But with that on, we're going to now install this strap end. If you have one of the clamp types, you would just put it on and then squeeze it shut. Mine is a screw-in one, so I'm just going to slide that over my stitches there very carefully so that it's in the middle of my strap end. And then I'm just going to screw my little screws into those holes there. I like to apply just a tiny bit of thread locker onto my screws, and then I just will pick them up with a pair of pliers with a piece of scrap there to protect my workspace. Just pop that into place there, and then I can screw that in. Start it off first, and then once I've got both in place, I can screw them down all the way. And then just making sure to wipe any excess off. Then we can fold this over, and we're going to punch a hole for our rivet. I like to do 2 rivets, but you can just do 1. I like to pop a clip there and then punch my hole. Being careful of where we just applied that strap, and you can measure or you can just eyeball it. Punch 1 hole through all of the layers there. Pop the first rivet in, and then we can pop our second one if you're going to do a second one. Then I will go and set those rivets. We now have the slider pot set. Grab one of your swivels and put it over the other open end and slide it up to where the fold is. Then we're going to feed it through this slider, which encloses this part of our strap in the middle of that loop. Put it back through the top. Grab your other swivel and slide that on. And then with that out of the way, we're going to put our other strap end on. This being the back of the strap. If you have one that you screw on, you're going to have it screw side up. Tuck it all the way in, and then the same way as we did at the other end, just screw in those screws. We've got our other strap end on. Slide your swivel back up here. Fold that over. If you're doing 1 rivet, you can punch that hole. If you're doing 2, slide it a little further up. The same as we did at the other end. Pop a clip on to hold it in place. Then we're going to punch our 2 holes or our 1 hole and set those rivets. Those are now set, and our strap is complete, so we can set that aside for now and go on to pack 2. We're now going to work on the lower front pocket. Check that on the back of your exterior piece, you have your strip of Decaville, you have your line marked, and you have your marking so you know which side is the top. You will also need your zipper with the pull installed and the tabs on, as well as your 2 lower pocket lining pieces, one which is a little bit shorter than the other. Take your shorter lining piece that is going to form the front lining part of the pocket, and we need to baste on our zipper. For this, the zipper will face to the right. That is because when it's in the bag, it will end up facing back this way, and by convention, zippers open from left to right, so you want it facing the right side. And that's also the upside of that pocket. Making sure that that zipper is centered. And again, you have your zipper pull facing the right side, and you're sewing the back of the zipper to the right side of your lining piece. We're now going to sew this zipper onto the front bottom piece. So we're going to place it face down onto that exterior. In order to make sure that we get a nice even stitch line, you can draw in your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then grab your zipper, making sure that the zipper pull, when closed, is facing the top of the bag and that is where this longer piece is. Place it face down and centered, and then we're just going to clip that in place. Now we're going to sew down this line, which is a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew with the lining side down so that it feeds more evenly through the machine. Slide your zipper pull out of the way, and making sure as you go along that all of your layers are staying nice and lined up. Now that the first half of that zipper is sewn on, we are going to sew the lining down to this seam allowance here. We are not sewing through the exterior at all. So we are doing what is like a top stitch, but it's really an understitch, just inside this pocket so that that pocket lining doesn't pop out. So the same way as you would do a top stitching, except that you won't see it from the outside, just sewing straight down that edge there. Yeah. Now that you have that first lining piece sewn in place, we are going to place our second lining piece. Flip your bag around and again center that lining on that zipper tape there, and we are going to clip that in place. With this clipped in place, we're now going to sew along the upper edge here, just spacing that in place at 1/8 of an inch. So here we are sewing through the longer of the two lining pieces and the upper side of the zipper tape, taking care to keep those edges there lined up. I've just trimmed back this seam allowance here to reduce the bulk there. And what I'm also going to do is just transfer this hash marking, this pound side marking, over to this side of the pocket. And now we need to sew around the outside of this pocket. I find it to be easiest to sew it from this side, and we are sewing from just this zipper seam around the edge and back around to the other side. Do not sew past this seam line. Lining up your sides and sewing at 3/8 of an inch. Now we're just going to trim away some of this seam allowance. This gap here where there are no stitches is there on purpose, so don't worry about that. We're just going to trim away around the edges of this pocket. If you are going to place a tag on the outside of your bag, you would do that now. Choose your placement where you want that tag to go. You can fold over to get an idea of what that section of the bag is going to look like and choose whereabouts you want to place that tag. I'm not going to put a tag on this one, so I'm going to set this aside and grab my pack 3. Working now with pack 3, which is the middle pocket section of the front of the bag, we are first going to attach the middle front section to the lower section of the bag. So set aside your zipper and your two lining pieces for the moment and take your middle piece. Before I clip that into place, I'm just going to draw in that seam allowance like we did on the lower section. You don't have to do that if you're confident in getting your seam allowance right. Working from the side that has the hash or pound sign, we're lining that up with this side here. And we're going to center the zipper in this section here. They should be approximately the same length, but just getting it centered there. And we're just going to clip that on. Then we're going to be sewing the upper edge of the lower zipper pocket to the lower edge of the center section. We're going to be sewing down here at 3/8 of an inch. We are sewing through the exterior, middle, the lower pocket tape, zipper tape, and the longer lining piece, making sure that both are the pieces that have the pound sign there. Slide that zipper pull out of the way and continue along to the end. Now that that's sewn there, we are going to top stitch along this side of the zipper, leaving this blue side, that is the lower pocket, untop stitched. We're just going to top stitch along this part of the middle pocket that will then form this part of the front of the bag. Starting here at the zipper tab, sewing all the way down to the other zipper tab. This will be hidden so you can backstitch if you wish, or you can take long tails and then tie them through to the back. Making sure that this pocket is out of the way. Move your pull out of the way. We're just going to trim away this excess seam allowance here from the lower middle section. Just the vinyl of the middle section, not the zipper tape or the pocket. We can now start work on this middle pocket. Set the exterior pieces aside and grab your shorter of your two lining pieces and your zipper. The same way that we did for the lower pocket, we're going to place it zipper teeth facing up on the right side of the lining. The big part of the lining is to the right and the zipper head is to the right. Center your zipper tape on your lining piece, and then we're going to baste these two edges together. Now place your zipper teeth side down on the middle vinyl section. The zipper head will now be pointing to the left, and we're going to clip this in place here, lining up the edges. I have my seam allowance marked from earlier, and I'm now going to just sew down this edge at 3/8 of an inch. Being careful of that zipper pull, sewing through my middle front vinyl section, the zipper tape, and the shorter of the lining pieces. We have that first half of the pocket sewn into place, and now what we're going to do is just sew that lining down to that seam allowance there. Again, not top stitching through this exterior section. We are just sewing through the lining and the zipper tape and the seam allowance there. Just sewing down the edge here. Now that that lower part of the pocket is in place, grab the longer pocket lining piece, and we are going to baste that in place, lining up the top edge of that zipper tape with the top edge of that longer middle pocket lining. Basting at 1/8 of an inch, sewing through the longer of the lining pieces and the zipper tape. Then just trim back this seam allowance here, cutting just through the exterior vinyl section and leaving the tape and the pocket alone. And now we are going to sew around the edge of this middle pocket piece, lining up the edges, smooth that out, clip it in place, and just sewing around the edge at 3/8 of an inch, starting at the zipper seam line here and finishing up at the zipper seam line here. And again, it will leave that little gap there where the zipper tab is. And then we just will trim back that seam allowance around that pocket. We now need to grab our pack 4 and go through the same process to attach the last of the front pockets. So set aside your lining pieces and your zipper and take your top exterior piece, making sure that you have your 2 socket pieces in place. Before we start, I'm just going to draw in that seam allowance line. That is optional, you don't have to do that. Make sure also that you have your markings on the back of your exterior piece. The bottom of this piece is the one with the triangle on it. This is the triangle piece here, which I should transfer that over to this side. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach the uppermost section of the pockets to this zipper here. So we need to center that up and clip it into place, and then we are going to sew that on at 3/8 of an inch. Sewing through the top exterior piece and the zipper tape and the lining piece, making sure again that your pockets are out of the way. Now we will trim this seam allowance here at the triangle edge, just through this brown vinyl here, not through the zipper tape, not through the lining. Then we'll fold that open, finger press that down, and the same as we did for this zipper here, we will just top stitch just this side, the upper side of the zipper, not the lower side of the zipper. Making sure before you start that you're only going to be sewing through this seam allowance and the exterior vinyl here, and that your pocket pieces are smooth and flat out of the way. Starting at the zipper tab and sewing up to the other zipper tab. Move that zipper pull out of the way. Before we continue with the upper front pocket, we need to sew these 2 sections together so that there's not a big gap when we finish our bag. Grab a pen and a ruler. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold this lower section up onto that middle section. Grab your ruler and we're going to draw a line that is 1 inch up from the side here and 1/4 of an inch from that line that we drew in the marking stage. And you're just going to draw a line on the back of that lower pocket piece. And the same at this end. 1 inch in from the side and 1/4 of an inch down from that line. Here and here. And on the back, you've got your 2 pieces laying flat, and this blue piece is sticking a little further out. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a clip on either end here to just keep those layers together, so that they are nice and flat and smooth. And flip it back over. And what we're doing now is we're sewing on this line and back stitching just that 1 inch line here on both sides, sewing through the 2 layers while they're nice and flat, and then we will have a stitch line that will join those 2 sections together. You can see that I've sewn those lines right on top of the pen mark that we made and back stitched well. It looks like this on the back. And what we're now going to do is set a rivet just past that line. If you're going to be top stitching your folds on your Fibi, you're going to want to make sure that your rivet is set far enough away that it's not going to get in the way of that top stitching line. And you can even wait to set that rivet until after you have done your top stitching. I'm not going to be top stitching, so I'm going to set my rivet, but I'm going to set it just beyond where that line is so that it doesn't impede with that fold. So just mark where you want to set your rivet. And this is just to help close up a potential gap there when we finish making the bag. Make sure that you're not punching through anything other than those 2 exterior layers, and that you're placing your rivet on this side, the side that has that lower lining pocket of that line. So I'm just going to pop rivets in both of those places there. And I'm just going to go and set those with my rivet press. Now that those rivets are set in place, we can continue working on our uppermost pocket. With that lining piece sewn down, we can now trim away the excess vinyl in the seam allowance here. Now grab your longer lining piece for that uppermost pocket, and we are going to clip that in place along the other side of that zipper to create the back of that upper front pocket. Flip that over, and we're now going to sew that basting stitch just along the top of that zipper. Just sewing at 1/8 of an inch, keeping the long edge of the zipper lined up with this upper pocket piece there. With this basting line of stitches done, we can now clip around this uppermost pocket so that we can sew the side seams. I'm also going to transfer that heart marking to the other side. And now I'm going to sew from this stitch line here that is sewing that zipper down all the way around at 3/8 of an inch. I am sewing through the 2 lining pieces, starting here, back stitching, and going all around. And then trim those seam allowances. Grab the front top trim piece from your pack number 5, which is the piece that has 2 studs and a socket, and it has the heart on the back. Mark the center of that pattern piece, and I am just going to draw a 3/8 of an inch line on the bottom of that piece. Mark the center of your zipper tape, your uppermost zipper, and then line up the 2 centers with the front trim face down on that zipper. I'm just going to place some clips there. And then I'm going to sew this front trim piece on from where the zipper tab starts to where the zipper tab is on the other end at 3/8 of an inch. This is sewn from here to here. We're now going to fold this piece out, and we are just going to top stitch along this upper edge of that zipper pocket from tab to tab. Making sure that you're sewing through just the exterior top there, the seam allowance, and that your pockets are well out of the way. With that top stitching done, we're now going to trim away the seam allowance right from the edge here all the way along to 1/8 of an inch, just cutting through that exterior vinyl. We're now going to sew the 2 dots at the bottom of the lower pocket section. Fold your dots over to line up the cut edge there, and we're going to sew at 3/8 of an inch from this edge straight down to around here, and repeat on the second dot, making sure you're just sewing through the 2 layers of that exterior lower pocket. Backstitch well, then we will just trim that seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch. And repeat for the second dot. If you are wanting to top stitch the folds of your bag, this is when you would do that. You would fold up on the lines here and then clip and sew along each of those folds. I'm not going to be top stitching this, but we do still need to get those folds in place and then baste the sides. So where your fold is on the back with the stabilizer piece, you should be able to fold that up and use the stabilizer piece as a guide to get a nice crease in your front pocket piece. So just fold your exterior around the stabilizer piece, and then we're going to clip that fold in place. If you were going to top stitch, you could do that now. Repeat for the next fold. You have your line drawn and your stabilizer piece that butts up to that line. Fold it over to wrap that exterior around the stabilizer piece and place more clips. And repeat for the last fold. The next thing we're going to do is baste these folds in place around the sides of this front bag piece. To do that, we need to line up the sides, but also create a slight gape in these pocket opening folds. We're going to line up the flat undersides first. And then we need to just slightly move that inwards so that it creates a little bit of a gape in this fold. Keep the bottom layer flat, but then this front where it's folded over, we're just going to move that in ever so slightly to create a small gape. And again on this side, the underside layer stays nice and flat and smooth. Clip that in place first, and then this front layer, we're just moving it ever so slightly in from that edge so that there's a small gape in this pocket here. And then keep that clip in place. Replace that clip. Bottom layer, nice and smooth and flat. But the front layer aligned a little further inward, still lining up with the edge there, and then reclip so that it's got a slight gape. And then you can see we just have very slight gaping in these pockets here that will allow easier access to those pockets and gives the slouchy aesthetic of the bag. What I'm now going to do is sew around the edges here to keep those pocket pieces in place. Sewing a basting stitch in the seam allowance. Something I want to point out quickly is that this is what the back of your front of the bag is going to look like. You can see where there is some of the front piece there past the edge of the upper piece. These two edges are not supposed to line up together like that. There should be that little stepped part just sticking out underneath, and that will give you the correct height of your bag. If you line these two edges up, your pockets won't sit as flat and your front of your bag will be too short. So you want to have that little staggered bit there when you're basting the front of your bag together. We're going to set that aside for now and grab the rest of pack 5. If you're going to be sewing a tag into your bag, grab one of your lining pieces and you're just going to position that tag so that it is 1 1/4 inch down from the top, centered on that lining piece. Using your ruler to get your placement. And then you can just go and sew that in place. Set the 2 lining pieces aside and grab your slip pocket piece. We're going to put a piece of double-sided tape just outside of the lines we made earlier in the marking section. And we're going to fold the short ends in to meet that line. Then I'm going to iron those folds there, and I'm also going to fold the pocket around that stabilizer piece and iron that crease there as well. The 2 folded edges here should line up when it is folded. We're going to open that back up, and then we are going to clip these 2 trim pieces in place. Starting at one end, lining up the edge of your slip pocket trim with the folded edge of your slip pocket. We're just going to clip that in place, making sure that it is flush at one end. And then the other side, again, keeping the side, this will be the front of your pocket so that your trim piece is flush with the fold there. And it may not be quite the same length at this end, depending on your folds, but that will be inside of the slip pocket. This end we want to keep nice and flush. And we're then going to sew down this edge here at 3/8 of an inch. Trim the vinyl in this seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch. And then we're going to fold this out and we're going to top stitch through the vinyl slip pocket trim down both edges here. With that top stitching done, we're now going to flip it over and we're going to put double-sided tape just outside of this seam allowance. Then we're going to fold the long raw edge here in to meet where that seam allowance ends. You can finger press or seam roll that crease. And then fold this folded edge over to meet the folded edge at the bottom. And then neaten up anything that needs neatening up on the bottom. Grab your lining piece that doesn't have the tag, and we are going to center this pocket up on that lining piece. Using a ruler, we want to measure 1 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. And we want our pocket to be the folded side up, the raw ends of the trim down, centered in that lining. I'm going to double check that it's centered from the top too, and that it is straight. And then we need to sew around the edges of this pocket. To keep that in place, you can put a little bit of painter's tape on there or some pins to just keep that where you want it on that lining piece. Starting at the top corner with long tails, we're going to sew through the 2 folds and the lining piece. Take long tails again at the end, and we will pull those through and tie a knot, and then apply some fray check to secure those threads. The last thing we have to do for this lining slip pocket is to place rivets. We're going to put the rivets centered and 1/4 of an inch down from this top slip pocket edge. Make your mark. Then we're just going to punch our holes and set those rivets. And now with those rivets set, we can set aside these 2 lining pieces for the time being. Working now with pack 6, you will need your shorter lining pocket piece and your zipper. You can set the other pieces aside for the moment. Following the same process as we did for the front pockets, we are going to first of all sew the shorter lining piece onto our zipper. I like to mark my centers. And then we're lining this zipper tape up along this top edge here, centered and with the pull going to the right. I'm then going to baste that zipper on to this shorter lining piece at 1/8 of an inch. Grab your back pocket piece, and I will draw a 3/8 of an inch line there to mark my seam allowance. This is again optional. I don't always do this when I'm sewing my bags, but for some, when the pocket is such a significant part of the look of the bag, I like to be very exact in my seams. Then again, I'm going to mark the center here. Then I will put my pocket lining piece face down. The zipper is now going the correct way from left to right. Center that up, clip it on, and then I'm going to sew the zipper with the pocket lining at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Sewing along this edge here, keeping a nice straight line and taking care with my zipper head. For this particular pocket, unlike we did for the front zipper pockets, when we sew this lining piece down to that seam allowance, we are actually going to top stitch through all of the layers. Something that I like to do to get a nice straight top stitching line is just add some double-sided tape in the seam allowance here and then fold that vinyl down to get a nice sharp fold. And then you can do the same thing for the lining. Folding that away from the zipper there. And then when you top stitch along here, you'll be sewing through all of those layers, and everything will just stay nicely in place for you. Grab your longer lining piece, and we are going to baste it onto this zipper, the same way as we've done with the other pockets. Right sides together with the lining that's already sewn in place and centered on that piece. We'll clip along here, and then we will sew it in place with a 1/8 of an inch basting stitch. With this basting stitch line done, we're going to flip the lower pocket over, and we're going to clip around the curves here. When we are going around, we're going to leave an opening in the bottom of this pocket lining, and that is how we will turn the bag when we have finished sewing it all together. We're going to be sewing from the edge here around, stopping approximately here, about an inch past the curve, and then sewing from an inch before the curve around to this side and stopping here where that stitch line starts. That will leave a tiny gap at the top like we have had for our other pockets. When I'm sewing this one, I find that it is easiest for me personally to sew from the side where I can start at the bottom and work around to the top. So you will see me flip it over as I'm going. Sewing at 3/8 of an inch, starting about an inch past the curve here. My edges are lined up, back stitching well, especially because this is where we will be turning our pocket. Coming around that curve, up towards that zipper. My exterior piece is out of the way. And I'm going to sew up to this line, but not through my exterior. So stopping before that top stitching line. And then back stitching there. And then you can see that it hasn't caught any of that exterior there. I'm going to come around to this side and sew the other way up. Smooth that lining out so that the edges meet. And again, starting about an inch past where the curve ends, back stitching well. And coming up to the top stitching line at the zipper on the other side. Sewing just through the 2 pocket lining pieces. Keeping that folded back out of the way. And then back stitching again. And we can then trim away this seam allowance here and here, leaving the full seam allowance, the section here where we will turn and then close the bag. Before we move on to the next step, I'm just going to create a memory fold in the bottom of this pocket lining here, so that when we turn our bag out and have to close that lining hole up, we will have a crease in place that will help us form that seam. We're now going to grab our zipper trim piece and find the center of that one. I'm going to mark that on both the top and the bottom. I'm going to find the center of the top part of the zipper tape. Now I'm going to place that zipper trim piece face down on the zipper and clip that in place. Then I'm going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch and then fold it up and top stitch along the top side of that zipper. Then fold that trim piece out and sewing through that seam allowance and the top of the trim piece. Take your completed bottom pocket and we're just going to trim the side of that zipper tab there to meet up with the zipper trim that we just added. Take your 2 connector pieces and turn them over so that the seam side is up. Pop a strip of double-sided tape down the middle of that connector piece. And then we're just going to slide on our triangle or D-rings and fold that in half with the raw ends meeting up. We need to measure the positions of our connector tabs. 1 3/4 of an inch in from the edge here and 1/2 inch over. And you can clip that in place. Same on the other side, 1 3/4 in and 1/2 inch over. You can use a ruler or your cutting mat as a guide. Clip that in place, and then we're just going to baste those connectors on. Grab your back top trim piece with just the single stud and lay that right sides together with this zipper trim, lining up the edges and the center. We're now going to sew this on at 3/8 of an inch. Sewing along this edge at 3/8 of an inch, just taking care when you get to the connector tabs, you may need a hump jumper to help you get over that extra bulk. We're then going to fold that top piece under and top stitch this seam here on that thin trim piece. Taking care that it's folded under and using your hump jumper if you need it as you go over those bulky connectors. We need to place 2 more rivets, so we're going to center those in the middle of the strap and in the middle of this trim piece. Punch the holes and get those set. And with those rivets set, we're just going to trim this vinyl here, just at the side seam, to reduce some of that bulk. Set your back part of your bag aside and grab your front. And we're just going to trim any pieces that we need to trim around the edge. The finished shape of your front piece should quite closely match the finished shape of your back piece, so you can just go around and make sure that your curves are all lining up. Then take your 2 lining pieces, and you can decide which you want to be the front and which you want to be the back. We're going to pair those up. Put the right side of the lining piece down on the right side of the bag exterior. However you've paired them up is up to you. I'm going to clip those in place. We're then going to sew along this top edge at 3/8 of an inch. Sew with the lining side down, as it is the thinner of the 2 materials. Back stitching well. Now we're going to trim away this lining piece just within the seam allowance, leaving the exterior vinyl there of the top trim alone. Then we're going to fold that lining out and top stitch along this seam on the lining side. Trim the corner pieces of that top trim just to reduce the bulk in that seam allowance. Double check that your zipper pocket on the back is open, as this is where we will be turning the bag. Make sure that your lining has that turning hole. And now we will lay the 2 sides, right sides together, and we're going to clip around the entire edge. When I'm clipping, I like to line up the seams here. Where that fold is, I'm going to line that up. I'm going to put a clip on either side, And then I'm going to pop a staple in there to keep that seam lined up very well when we sew around the entire outside of our bag. Check also that your snaps are lined up. Mine automatically snapped together just then, so I can see that that's going to work well. You can also check these snaps here. And those are going together well. I will place that staple, and then I'm going to continue clipping around the entire outside of the bag. Continuing to clip around, I'm just going to keep these pockets out of the way. Just going to pop a clip in them to keep them out of the sides. And I'm going to line up my curves at the bottom and keep clipping around the exterior of the bag. Now that we have the entire edge clipped together, we're going to go and sew around the whole thing at 3/8 of an inch, making sure that this pocket is open and out of the way, and that our front pockets are out of the way also. If you have put any staples in to help line up your seams, just make sure that the prongs are tucked in. I like to backstitch at that join point. I also sew with the front of the bag down so that the extra layers have the help from the feed dogs when they're going through the machine. Make sure that those pockets on the back are out of the way so you don't catch them in your side seam. Just keep those pockets well and truly out of the way. If you're concerned about the pockets, you can sew with the front side up so that you can better see where they are. Keep those edges lined up. And meeting back up with where we started. Check that you are happy with all of your seams, that your pockets are clear of the side seam. Remove the staples if you use them. And then we are going to trim the seam allowance the whole way around using our pinking shears. We're now going to turn the bag out. Going in through this open pocket and through the open zipper there, we're going to carefully and gently pull the entire bag out through that pocket. Putting your hand in through that opening, you can poke out your side seams to really smooth them out. Smooth the pockets out. Make sure that you are happy with how everything looks before we close up that turning hole. These bottom corners you don't need to poke out because we're going to tuck that lining back in. Bring this back pocket out and then folding it closed using that memory fold that we made earlier. Have those edges oppose. Pop a few clips on there. And then you can hand sew that closed, or you can sew that on your sewing machine. I'm just sewing this opening closed, starting beyond where your stitches ended and back stitching well so that the opening is entirely closed. And keep going past where the opening ends and back stitching at the other end also. That is all of our sewing done, and now we just need to tuck the bag in to give it its final shape. Using the stabilizer at the top there to guide that uppermost fold, tuck your main lining in, deep down in the bottom corners. Tuck that closed up lining in also. Check that out, front pockets are tucked in still. And we can just press this top fold here. Grab your strap from earlier. And there you have your finished Fibi crossbody. Thanks, everyone.